Managing performance as a manager or a leader is one of the most important and yet very uncomfortable and tricky to navigate situations that you'll come across, but it is necessary. If you want your team to get great results, drive high performance, and if you want to be seen as a leader that is trusted and respected, you need to manage performance early and consistently, especially if it's starting to dip into poor performance. Because, hey, look, the reality is that not everyone is going to perform at a high level all of the time. Sometimes that's going to dip, but you need to be willing to step up and manage it early so that it doesn't start impacting their overall trajectory and career growth, and it doesn't start to impact the rest of the team. That's why I want to talk about it in this episode in particular, because I want to help you manage performance before it has a detrimental impact on your deliverables, on your team member, and on the rest of the team. I'm going to talk about what poor performance actually is, how to navigate it and move through it, and then also some reminders that's going to help you when maybe you want to avoid this and not do this at all. So let's jump on in. Firstly, what is poor performance or performance issues? Well, essentially, it's when the person's performance is no longer meeting the expectations or the required level that you're expecting or that is required of them in their role. So this might look like they're not achieving the goals that have been set for them, or they're not delivering on the outcomes or deliverables that's required. They might be acting or behaving in a way that goes against the culture of the team or the company in terms of what's normally expected. So performance can also be behavioral as well, or the outputs and deliverables aren't meeting the standards that's required. Maybe they're still doing the work, maybe they're still delivering the results, but it's actually not at the standard that you need it to be in terms of where their skill set is and where their experience is and what they should be delivering. So that is what it might look like if you're questioning, oh, is this poor performance or is this just a one-off? Now, sometimes it might be a one-off where maybe they just didn't meet the mark on this one thing. So you can have a conversation with them and keep moving forward. But if you're starting to notice a bit of a pattern of some of these things coming up, then you more likely than not have a performance issue. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you wait and wait to see if this is an ongoing pattern. If you start to notice like, oh, this is out of the norm, this isn't what I'm really wanting to expect from this person, then I would always encourage having that conversation early. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. I'm going to give you the structure so that you can navigate this with a little bit of confidence and hopefully some clarity as well. So, how to manage performance issues. The first thing that you always need to do is just take a moment and get clear on what the actual issue is or the gap. Now, one thing that managers do too often is they jump in head first and then they try and address the problem, but they don't actually know what the real specific problem or issue is. And this is something that we need to make sure that we have really clear so that we can have a really productive conversation with the person. When you're trying to identify what the issue actually is, you need to know what were the original expectations that were set? How are they not meeting it? So how are they not doing what they're required to do? And you need to have specific examples to follow it up. So people are not going to be willing to follow through and have this conversation if you don't have specific examples for them to talk to. This is why it's so important to know what the issue actually is and have examples that you can point to. The more specific you can be, the more willing people are to listen, and they're actually going to be able to have something to respond to. They're going to be able to say, oh, I know exactly why that happened, or oh, that's a really good point. I didn't really see it that way, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the first thing to do. Get clear on what the problem actually is. Now, the second thing is before you have the conversation with the person, get prepared to have the conversation. So what that entails is check your why. So why are you having this conversation, and make sure those facts are clear. So again, know what the issue actually is and that you have examples. Check your emotional state. So make sure that you are clear-minded and regulated. If this is an ongoing problem that's been going for a while and you've left it and haven't dealt with it, and now you're frustrated or maybe even angry, that's on you. You need to regulate yourself and make sure that you are clear-minded to have this conversation with this person. Maybe you need to go speak to your HR person. Maybe you need to just check in with your coach. How can you just ground yourself, regulate yourself so that you can have the best conversation you can with this person? And then the third thing to do to prepare for this conversation is check your assumptions. What assumptions are you making about what you think is happening? So there can be more than one reason why someone's not performing. So I think about this as there are four four kind of main reasons why someone might not be performing or why their work might not be meeting the standards. The first thing could be a big workload. They just have too much to do, which means that they're missing key things or they're just not getting around to getting things done properly. Unclear expectations. So the expectations of what they need to be doing and the standards that they need to be meeting are unclear. Or expectations are unclear in terms of priorities. What do they need to be working on first so that they're meeting the requirements that you need? The third thing could be lack of competence, or there's a gap in their capability, or there's a lack of training. So this kind of comes back to they don't have the capability to actually do what they need to be doing. And that can either be a fault of their induction, or maybe you, because you haven't trained them properly, or they haven't followed through on the training that they were given to be able to be prepared for their role. So that could be a reason. And then the last thing that I always remind managers to think about is there could be something personally going on for them that's impacting their ability to be focused at work or to show up at work in the way that they would normally show up and work. It could be any one of those four reasons. And the truth is that you don't know what the reason is until you speak to them. So you need to check your assumptions. Like, what are you assuming and what are you making assumptions on? And how could that impact your ability to be open to what the actual reason is for when they come in, when you have that conversation with them? So that is the second most important thing to do is prepare yourself for that conversation. These conversations are more often than not impacted by the way that we show up in them. So the more prepared we can be, the more regulated we can be, the more open-minded we can be to what they might say, to how they might react, to the way that we might deliver this conversation will have such an impact on how they're willing to engage in that conversation and what they're willing to share and talk about and how you move forward from there. So, getting really clear on what the issue is and then preparing yourself for the conversation is the two most important steps. And then you're going to have the conversation with them. Now, I will preface this like, this is not a formal performance management process. In New Zealand, there is employment law and there's a formal performance management process that you would need to follow if you are formally managing someone's performance and potentially looking to dismiss them from their employment or terminate their employment. I'm not speaking to the formal process because that there's just so much nuance. I'm talking about how to handle poor performance when it's starting to show up. So you're at the initial stages and you're wanting to address it early before you get into formal conversations. Now, if you are likely stepping into formal conversations, make sure that you speak to your HR person. If you work in a company that has an HR team, make sure you speak to them that you are following the proper process because there is employment law, there are policies around this. So make sure you know what they are. If you work in a small company, or maybe you're the business owner and you don't have HR support, seek an HR consultant or look on your country's employment law website and get an idea of what that is. If you want some specific advice, I am more than happy to help you. So you can just reach out, flick me an email or message me and we can have a chat about it because I do HR consulting as well. But this, again, I'm just saying that this is not how to formally performance manage someone where you might potentially be terminating their employment. But this is just how you're starting those initial conversations to make sure that you don't get to formal processes. One of the most important parts, if you are looking at doing a formal process, is that there is documentation of informal conversations. So this is essentially what that is you're having some informal conversations of what you're noticing and trying to course correct before it becomes a formal problem. So that's what I'm trying to share here. So I just wanted to caveat that before I go into this next piece. So the third step is to invite them to a conversation. So just bring them in, have a chat with them, ideally one-on-one, because you're talking directly to some of the performance that you're noticing. This is just your initial informal conversation, like I talked about. So you're sharing your observations and you're wanting to gather information. So you're wanting to share what you're noticing. Hey, I noticed that you're not delivering this, or hey, I'm noticing that you're behaving in a way that is this, or hey, the standards of your work isn't where I need it to be based on what you've been delivering before. So you're just really wanting to open up that conversation, share your examples, maybe even share your assumptions. Like some assumptions that I'm making is that correct? Or I really want to know what's happening here. And the purpose of this conversation is to find out their side. So you really want to give an opportunity for them to share what is going on in their words so that you can better understand what is happening for them. So, an example of how this might go, you might invite them into the conversation and say, hey, I really want to have a conversation with you about some of your performance. I've got some examples and I just want to share my side. And then I really want to open it up so that you can share what is going on for you or what the reason might be. So you delivered this piece of work, or you were meant to deliver this piece of work on this date. I haven't seen it. And I expected that it was going to be there based on the conversations that we've had before. I want to understand what's going on. Why did you miss that deadline? Another example could be, this is the expectation of what we talked about on what you were going to deliver. I followed up, I checked in, you said everything was on track, but then when you did deliver it, it really didn't hit the mark, and it didn't hit the mark for this and this reason. Can you talk me through what happened? Can you talk me through how you got to this endpoint? And then you just share that, and then you allow that to sit. And then you allow them to give their answer and their response. Now, depending on the level of trust and respect that you have with your team members, is going to determine how willing they are to be vulnerable and share what's really going on. So you really want to make sure that you've done your due diligence in terms of being a really good manager and setting up those foundations with your team so that they're more willing to be open and honest about what is going on. And so just have that conversation, hear what they have to say, then you will need to reset expectations. So depending on what the answer is, you will always need to some extent reset expectations to go, okay, I understand why that happened. So moving forward, this is what then needs to happen. Or to avoid that happening again, what do you need to put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again? Or is there anything that you need in order to minimize the chance of this happening again? If you didn't listen to my episode around how to coach anyone in 15 minutes or less, I would recommend listening to that episode, because it'll give you some really good coaching questions to help you create really good accountability and ownership with your team members. And when you're resetting expectations, doing that can be really helpful. Once you've had that conversation, you've reset expectation, make sure that as part of resetting those expectations, you know when you're going to check in, you know how often you're going to check in, and you know what success looks like at the end of it. I also have a full episode on how to set expectations. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, I'll link that in the show notes as well. So you can go back and listen to that on how to set expectations with your team, which can be super helpful as well. And then once you've had that conversation, once you've reset those expectations, once you know how you're going to move forward, you finish the conversation and then you go ahead. What I would always recommend is just following up with something in writing. So just following up with an email, just say, hey, following our conversation, this is what we spoke about. This is the expectation that we've reset. If you've got any questions, please let me know. What this means is that you are documenting that conversation, and you're also giving them the opportunity to correct anything that you've misunderstood. And this can be really powerful, because if you do end up having to go into a formal process, there is going to be a requirement for documentation. The better your documentation is, the better it's going to be. And also, if you have followed it up in writing, they got given the opportunity to correct anything and they didn't, the understanding is that the expectation is correct and it's clear. And so then if 3 months down the track, they go, I didn't agree with that, and I don't think that's what should have happened. I gave you the opportunity and you never replied. So this is the expectation that we're holding you to. You don't have to get super formal with it, like writing a whole file note and then doing all of these things, but just a summary of what was discussed, and then just keep it for every single person, especially when it comes to performance or challenges that you're having with anyone on your team. Because the more that we can just keep track of what's going on, the better we're actually going to be able to lead our people, because we're going to be able to reference back, go, hey, we've actually spoken about this 3 times. Here, here, and here, it seems like nothing's changing. We might need to start going down a formal process unless something changes, or unless we can understand what's going on. So again, like, documentation can just be really helpful for you. And as I said, if this is uncomfortable stuff, it's tricky stuff, but it is so important to know how to do it, and to do it consistently, and to do it as early as possible in these situations, because the longer it's left undealt with, the longer it's left not spoken about, the worse it gets. And then it's so much harder to follow through on a process and maintain a really good relationship throughout. So that is what I recommend. And we dive into this really deeply in VIP Leaders, my leadership development program. The doors will be opening in May. So if you want to jump on the interest list to be the first to know about early bird pricing, if you want to know more about the program, you can go to the link in the show notes and jump on the interest list, which you'll get some fast action bonuses. You'll get early bird pricing. I am doing a shorter launch this time. So there's only going to be 3 weeks to register. So if you are interested, make sure you're on that list so that you can get in early. And I would recommend this program if you want the absolute ace level foundational skills to help you become an amazing leader that people actually want to follow. This is going to be the program for you. You're going to level up your identity, you're going to increase your emotional intelligence, and you're going to learn how to coach and influence so that people actually buy into what you do and why you do it. So that's a little bit of what you want. Get on the interest list for VIP leaders so that you can jump in when the doors open. So just to finish up, I wanted to share some reminders for you because I know that we want to shy away from this work, but it is important work that we must follow through with. The first thing is you can't manage what you are not clear on. So performance management is always easier to do when you have set expectations up front very clearly and people understand what's expected of them. When your expectations are clear, it is easier to give feedback and it is easier to identify when someone is not meeting them. So make sure that you have taken the time to set clear expectations at the beginning so that you can rely on them when you need them. The second thing, whatever your assumptions are, it's not the full story. So whatever you think is going on, it's not the full story. So don't believe your assumptions until you've had the full conversation. One of the biggest things that we do, and our human brains do this by default, is we make assumptions. When we don't have all of the information, the brain will make up information to fill the blanks. But that can actually be more damaging than helpful. So we need to recognize, hey, I'm making assumptions, but I don't know the full story. So I'm going to have the full conversation so that I can actually know what's going on. And again, if you can share, hey, I don't want to make any assumptions about what's going on or why this is happening. So I really want to have this conversation with you. You are actually going to build amazing trust and respect with your team member or with whoever you're having this conversation with. So just remember that. And the third thing is that it's going to feel hard and uncomfortable, but it does get simpler as you go. The more that you have these conversations, the more that you front it early, the more that you develop the skill set, the easier and simpler it gets over time. And if you do this regularly, people just know that this is part of how you lead. And that is a great trait to be known for. There we go. I wanted to keep this nice and short and sweet. Again, as I mentioned, this is not diving into formal performance management based on employment law. So make sure that you seek out support from an HR consultant or from your HR business partner and make sure that you follow the correct process. But before you get anywhere near formal processes, this is the structure to follow to make sure that you identify issues early and address them early so that you can course correct before it becomes a big problem. All right, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. As always, I would love to hear what you think. Message me on Instagram or LinkedIn or flick me an email and have a great week. And I'll be back in your ears again next week. Hey, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for listening to Lead with Less. It means the world to me if you could take a moment to leave a rating and a review on Apple or just rate with 5 stars on Spotify. It means a lot to the growth and the expansion of the podcast. And if you know any other people leaders who could do with a dose of inspiration to level up their leadership skills, then please forward on this podcast to them. I would really appreciate it. And as always, if you have any feedback or have any thoughts, please message me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or email. I'd love to hear from you.